As humans, it is easy to confine ourselves within the walls of our own understanding, shutting out anything that feels foreign or unfamiliar. We draw circles around our beliefs, whether they stem from religion, culture, or societal norms, and label anything outside of those circles as other. We alienate differences, dismissing people as them, they, and those people. But here's the truth. Within our own communities, nothing remains the same. Change is the only constant. Our beliefs, identities, the way we dress, speak, and even think, everything evolves. Yet often we resist this change, blinded by comfort or fear of the unknown. Let's look back at history. Hypatia was a prominent scholar and head of the Neoplatonic school of philosophy in Alexandria. She became famous for her works on mathematics, astronomy, and her commentaries on ancient texts, as well as for her teachings. However, her intellectual influence and pagan beliefs made her a target during a time of rising religious tension between Christians and non-Christians in Alexandria. In 415 AD, a Christian mob, incited by political and religious leaders who saw her as a symbol of paganism and a threat to Christian dominance, brutally murdered Hypatia. They dragged her from her chariot, stripped her, and killed her using tiles or pottery shards. Afterward, they mutilated her body and burned her remains. Her tragic death marked a turning point in the decline of classical knowledge in Alexandria and symbolized the conflict between reason and religious intolerance during that period. Hypatia remains a symbol of intellectual freedom and the dangers of fanaticism. Let's look at another tragic incident. Jordano Bruno, a 16th century philosopher, dared to think differently in an age when it was dangerous to do so. He believed in an infinite universe, filled with countless stars and planets, many of which he theorized might harbor life. At a time when the Catholic Church held the geocentric view that the Earth was the center of the universe, Bruno boldly supported the Copernican model that Earth revolves around the Sun. But Bruno went further, suggesting that the Sun was just one of many stars, each possibly with its own planetary systems. Today, we know he was right. Earth is just one of many planets in a vast universe teeming with stars and celestial bodies. Earth is merely a stardust formed together as a celestial body, while there are billions or even trillions of other Earth-like planets. Bruno's vision of the cosmos has become the foundation of modern astronomy. Yet in his time, these revolutionary ideas were deemed heresy. His beliefs brought him into direct conflict with the Church, and for 7 long years he was imprisoned, interrogated, and urged to recant his views. But Bruno refused to abandon his ideas. In 1600, the Church sentenced him to death. He was burned alive in Rome's Campo dei Fiori. His execution was meant to silence his ideas, but his death became symbolic of the tragic conflict between intellectual freedom and dogmatic authority. What Bruno died for, what was considered a radical, dangerous idea, would later become accepted as fact, proving how closed minds can stifle progress. Consider the slow evolution of women's roles in society. Not long ago, even in advanced societies, women were confined to the home, considered unfit for leadership roles or participation in certain activities like sports. As recently as the 20th century, women were prohibited from competing in many athletic events, and societal expectations dictated strict dress codes that limited their participation. Sports were seen as too strenuous for women, with attire often reinforcing these restrictive roles. Yet, over time, this began to change. In the early 1900s, women slowly started to break into sports, and by 1960, Wilma Rudolph won 3 Olympic gold medals in track and field, a breakthrough moment that symbolized the power of women's inclusion. Decades later, in 1972, Title IX was passed in the United States, prohibiting gender discrimination in federally funded education programs, including athletics. This law revolutionized women's participation in sports, leading to their greater inclusion at all levels of competition. And let's not forget the cultural evolution surrounding women's dress. In sports, women once wore restrictive clothing that hindered movement. Now women compete freely, no longer constrained by old norms. From the modest beginnings of female athletes to Serena Williams dominating tennis courts, change has been constant. Yet, even today, in some conservative corners of the world, the battle for equal participation and recognition continues. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, followed by the 13th Amendment in 1865, abolished slavery after centuries of the brutal institution, but it took the Civil War and decades of intense activism to achieve this. This was not the end. The Civil Rights Movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, fought against racial segregation and discrimination. It was only in 1954 that the Supreme Court declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 prohibited racial discrimination in voting, removing barriers that had long suppressed minority voters. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 aimed to abolish wage disparity based on gender, while the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And then, history made another leap. In 2008, the United States elected Barack Obama as its first black president, a moment that shattered long-standing racial barriers and signified the progress made through centuries of struggle. His presidency marked a profound shift in a country still grappling with the scars of racial inequality. But this moment was not the end of change. It was a milestone, showing that progress, though slow, is possible when minds open. The journey continued with yet another groundbreaking moment in 2020, when Kamala Harris became the first female vice president of the United States. A woman of Black and South Asian descent, Harris's election shattered glass ceilings that had stood for centuries. Her rise to the second highest office in the land showed the world that women, too, can lead at the highest levels, a notion long resisted but finally embraced. Even today in the United States, in many conservative parts of the country, women are still deemed unfit for the highest office or leadership roles. These stereotypes often cite outdated views about women's hormones or emotional stability. But change is not always a battle against external forces. It can be a personal one, since many women still believe in these misconceptions by themselves in some parts of the world. Alan Turing, a brilliant mathematician and the father of modern computing, broke the German Enigma code, helping the Allies win World War II. Yet, despite his monumental contributions, Turing was persecuted for his homosexuality. In 1952, he was convicted and subjected to chemical castration, a fate that shattered his spirit and career. Tragically, Alan committed suicide on June 7, 1954. He was just 41 years old. Decades later, the UK acknowledged its wrongs, offering Turing a posthumous apology. His life is a sobering reminder of how fear of difference can destroy brilliance, and how society often punishes what it fails to understand. We've seen these patterns before. History is a long, painful lesson of resisting and fearing the unknown, only to realize in time that embracing difference is not only the path to growth, but it's a way of life. Time and again, we've rejected new ideas, clung to the familiar, and demonized what we didn't understand. From burning thinkers at the stake to oppressing women and minorities, history has shown the danger of close-mindedness. We've been wrong before, and we learned. We have evolved as a society by accepting what once seemed foreign or threatening, whether it's scientific ideas, women's rights, racial equality, or personal freedoms. Bruno was right about the stars. He was right about Earth not being the center of the universe. But it took centuries for the world to accept the truth. Today we explore the far reaches of space because of ideas like his. Remember, close-minded fanaticism is still prevailing in some parts of the world. People are still being killed by angry mobs based on religious hatred and blind beliefs. The universe, much like ourselves, is in constant flux. The only way to progress is to open our minds, to challenge what we know, and to welcome the unfamiliar. For it is in these spaces of discomfort that true growth occurs. To stay still, to remain locked within the boundaries of our own comfort, is to deny the essence of what makes us human, our ability to change, adapt, and rise. In the words of Bruno, perhaps you, my judges, pronounce this sentence against me with greater fear than I receive it. So let us not be afraid to push the boundaries of our understanding. If history has taught us anything, it is that fear of new ideas holds us back. The greatest thinkers, the bravest leaders, and the most transformative moments in history have all come from those willing to embrace what others feared. Let us dare to be better,